It is Friday, July 21st. Let's talk PlayStation. Just an FYI, I am recording this one a few hours earlier than I typically would because of just time constraints. So if some big PlayStation news story comes out and I'm not talking about it, that is why. But this past week was kind of a quiet, not really a whole lot going on, but we have a few things that that I would like to discuss with you all. And we'll get into the first one, which is really quick. The Patapon Remaster, that now has a release date for August 1st. So digitally, you can start to pre-order the game. PlayStation Plus members get a little bit of a discount, but if you are a hardcore PSP fiend from back in the day, you probably played this game, and it might be worth getting on PlayStation 4. Moving on to our second of 3 news stories total. This is sort of a big one, but Sony has announced beta signups for the next PlayStation 4 firmware update. If you remember the past few major incremental firmware updates, Sony's actually allowed people to sign up early to beta test the firmware, and this is going to be no different. So the next one that we should expect is 5.0, and that's what we're going to be seeing right here. We're currently on 4.72. We've had a few incremental updates, a few problems within those incremental updates, but this will be the big one. And now it's just a matter of what 5.0 is going to include, and there's still a number of features that a lot of people have been asking for that Sony has not added just yet. The good thing is that, now if you kind of remember, a few times Sony would release surveys to people through email and things like that, and the surveys would sort of ask, what people want to see out of the next firmware update for PlayStation 4. And surprisingly, if you were to look back at some of those old surveys, you'd find out that Sony actually added a lot of features that people had answered in those surveys. So while we don't know what 5.0 is going to include until Sony decides to tell us, or until beta testers actually get the firmware and decide to show us themselves, we do know that Sony added notifications when people come online, PS2 classics, folders appearing offline, filtering options for game libraries, downloading avatars to PS4, custom backgrounds and themes. These are all things that were previously asked in a survey. In terms of what we could expect in 5.0, that's the interesting part. We still have not seen the inclusion of PS1 classics, completely removing games from the library, deleting items, specifically a store wish list, increasing the max number of people in a party, or the big one that we still all really want is changing PSN IDs, which I guess you would assume they might need a firmware update to include that sort of feature. Certainly that wouldn't be something server-side unless they just update specifically just the PlayStation Store, assuming they would charge people for an ID change every time you want to do it. But those are things that were previously asked during a survey, and we still haven't seen those just yet. So you got to figure maybe one or two of those will be in the pipeline for 5.0. Myself, I always want the one thing that I really don't care about anymore, and I understand that because it's 2017. A lot of people like to stream content nowadays, but I would still like to store files locally onto the PlayStation 4, just like I did with PlayStation 3. PS3 was kind of a really awesome media hub. I had tons of files on it, whether it was my music, my photos, or videos. I don't care that PS4 can play these files. I want to store them on the PS4. I don't want a USB drive stuck in my PS4. That's my preference. That's my choice. I hope that would be a feature that would be included at some point, but I'm not getting my hopes up anymore. But there's still a lot that we could certainly expect. Now it's just a matter of if we will actually see these things. And now if you remember my 2017 predictions for PlayStation, I had 2 of these features in there. I said that this year I would expect Sony to finally add PS1 classics to the PlayStation 4 via software emulation, those PS1 games. My guess right now is that they're going to be doing the same thing that they're currently doing with the classic PS2 games on PS4, which is to actually add trophy support to them, which, if that were the case, that would mean it would be a much slower rollout for PS1 games, because they have to go back and not only add that functionality, but QA test them and certify and all that ridiculous jazz that takes a while for games to come to show up on the store. So if they were to do that with PS1 games, that might tell you why it's been sort of a slow rollout for that, to get the ball rolling on actually releasing PS1 games. I also predicted that this year, and even the year before that I predicted it, but I think now is finally the time to see PlayStation Network ID changes. I think the tea leaves are there. Sony has been working on it. They have been investigating it. They commonly talk about it openly all the time. Shuhei Yoshida discusses it a number of times about how it's not as easy as we think. If Sony could do it, they would. I totally believe that. It is basically free money for them, so if they could allow ID changes, they would have done it a long time ago. There's something that's keeping them from doing it, but I think after all these years, I think they've finally sort of cracked it or figured it out, or they're very close to actually giving people this feature. So I would hope this would be something in 5.0. And certainly this would be something they would save for a big firmware update like 5.0. This is a big feature people ask for all the time. So to make it, to catch people's interest, to sort of be the talk of the town that week, to make headlines, including name changes into 5.0 would be a pretty big deal. So I would hope that we would see that as well. For our final news story, I thought this would make for a pretty interesting conversation. Typically, I wouldn't want to include the same analyst 2 weeks in a row, but it's sort of the same situation as last week. He made some pretty good statements that I actually kind of agree with a little bit, and I just thought it would be interesting. Also, it's kind of a slow news week. Not really a whole lot going on, specifically to just PlayStation, as we often do on Let's Talk PlayStation. Anyway, this is again from Wedbush security analyst Michael Pachter. He was talking about sort of the competition between Xbox One and PlayStation 4 come this holiday season. So I will just share the quotes he said immediately. He was talking to Gaming Bolt and said, "I don't think Microsoft is all that competitive. Xbox One S is priced the same as the PS4, and I don't think they are competitive at all with the Xbox One X, currently priced at $499, $100 more than the PS4 Pro, and highly likely to be priced $150 more than the PS4 Pro by the holiday. My guess is Sony will cut the everyday PS4 price to $249 and the PS4 Pro price to $349 this holiday, and Microsoft will be too expensive. So Sony will keep its price advantage this holiday." He went on to say, "That said, I think exclusives only make a difference to about a fifth of the market, 20%. Sony's outselling Microsoft literally 2 to 1, mostly because they screwed up so badly with the PS3, but done such a great job with the PS1 and PS2. They're winning back that audience. Outside the US, they are not selling Xbox 2 to 1 in the US. It's probably closer to 11-10. But guys outside the US, they were PlayStation and PS2 owners, and they're coming back home to the PS4 this time. So I think that's the biggest differentiator. These guys were PlayStation households. Sony just has a huge advantage everywhere in the world." Now, going back to the first quote there, that's sort of in line with what I've been talking about for a while. If you've been watching on these videos, you know that I've been saying quite frequently that Microsoft, I just feel that Microsoft isn't as concerned with Sony's numbers anymore. And if you don't really believe me on that, you can sort of look at Microsoft's moves the past few months anyway. It's obvious what they're doing. The price of the Xbox One X, you know, or the fact that they're unifying Windows and Xbox, or their constant press conferences where they're just showing games not just for Xbox, but for everything, more or less. The whole platform, the console exclusive first nonsense, that's all it is. It's just nonsense. You can watch a Microsoft show and be excited no matter what console you own. When you see them make moves like that, it's clear, and it's probably the best move for them at this point anyway. You know, for the first few years of Xbox One, they were very concerned with catching Sony, and they're doing very pro-consumer things, very friendly consumer choices, and that's great. They're still doing things like that. I think it benefits everybody more or less, but the fact of the matter is Microsoft knows their place, and they know Sony is in a sort of unreachable place right now, at least with this current console generation. Microsoft's sort of doubling down on the fact that they have current consumers, they're making people happy, they're giving goodwill to everybody, and right now they're making money anyway. You know, why be concerned with beating Sony when they're doing all right as is? And at the end of the day, software sales is where they're going to find most of their money. Unify Windows and Xbox, get people to sort of play in that ecosystem. That's going to work well for them. Hopefully in the long term. You would guess that that's their sort of vision right now. They want to focus for the next 5-10 years from now, not necessarily right now. And on the flip side of Sony things, that's sort of what I've been saying too. Now currently PS4, the official MSRP is $299, but you'd be hard-pressed to find it at that price. If you're paying $299, you're probably going to get an extra controller, 2 or 3 extra games via a retailer bundle, but mostly you'll find a PS4 on sale for $249, and even at $249, it's still going to come with a game or something like that. So there's always great deals to find on a PS4, and currently with the PS4 Pro, Sony is pretty pleased with their numbers. It's actually doing more than they thought they would, which is good for Sony. But more specifically, come holiday season, you could absolutely see that thing go down to $349. At that point, it will be a year old. And same with Pachter talking about Xbox One X. It's $499. Going back to last week's LTPS, Sony's probably going to be in that sort of position where come 2019, 2020, when they release the next generation of PlayStation, doing a completely native 4K box at that point would be not only, say, a $400 machine, but most households would have a 4K television. Microsoft is sort of preparing for that future. They are sort of making moves where just they don't care about what the other guy's doing. They're focusing on what they want to do, and that's fine. That's what they have probably their own internal expectations within the company, and Sony has their own strategy at play. It's not like PS3 360 back in the day. That was sort of very heated Sony versus Microsoft battle. It was a very interesting one too, but that's just not the case anymore. Now going into Pachter's other sort of comments about why PlayStation is doing so well nowadays, for the most part I would agree with him, but I wouldn't attribute it to just that. In fact, I've been wanting to make a video about this for the longest time. just one single video specifically talking about why Sony's doing as well as they're doing and why Microsoft is just having such a hard time moving just as many units as Sony, even with how much goodwill they're bringing to consumers. I want to make a video specifically on just that, but to touch on it real quick, it's not necessarily just PlayStation people coming back to PS4 from, you know, the 360 generation. I think a lot of it also has to do with the fact that Microsoft messed up so badly with Xbox One. That sort of PR disaster that they had in 2013, it's pretty impactful. That sort of stuff stays with consumers for a long time. Not only is it just that, but it's also the fact that Sony did so well at the end generation of PS3. They messed up the beginning of PlayStation 3 quite poorly, but at the end of PlayStation 3, it lined up pretty nicely for them with the fact that they were constantly releasing quality exclusives. There was always, you know, 15 to 20 very good exclusive PSN games coming out, you know, 2008 and onward. And in that same time frame, 2008 onward, is when Microsoft was making a lot of iffy decisions with Xbox 360, whether it was doubling down on Kinect or just releasing another Forza, another Halo, another Gears of War, focusing on more family-oriented games. I mean, Microsoft was doing weird stuff at that time, and that was when Sony was doubling down on PlayStation 3. So it was like, I can't just attribute it to one thing. It's just like a number of things that just kind of led up to this point of where we are now, where PS4 is still outselling the rate of PS2, and Microsoft is now struggling to, you know, keep up with at least reaching half of Sony's sales outside of the U.S., and that very much so is the case. In the U.S., yeah, that's pretty much what Pachter's saying. Microsoft still has a pretty good hold here. The Xbox name is still strong for the most part here, and I've been predicting for the longest time that Microsoft will at some point catch up to PS4 in the U.S., which still isn't the case. Sony's still holding them off for a little bit, but you know, that remains to be seen. We'll see what happens. Those are just some of the news stories I want to talk about with you guys this week. So if you didn't see it this past Monday, Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy, just Crash 1. The Let's Play is up right now. A lot of fun. We're doing pretty well. Part 2, I'm not going to lie, I get a little bit angry, and maybe Part 3 I'll probably get even angrier at that. But I got to keep my composure sometimes. I don't think I can let you guys see what I really get like when I get mad at video games. It's just, you know what? It's just not a good look. It's not. I don't break stuff, but let's face it, I start, you know, swearing and insulting things, and it's not a side of me you want to see. I'm going to be honest with you. But that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Jarryd Howard. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you guys next Friday.